Hi, and welcome back to Resurrecting Shorty, the ongoing restoration of my 1965 Series IIA short wheelbase Land Rover. Last time I took the old rear crossmember off, cleaned up the ends of the chassis rails, and then installed the new crossmember. Then we welded the new crossmember on so that it doesn't fall off when we're going down the road later on, before repeatedly stabbing the old one to teach it a good lesson about what it had done. So last time you saw me put the new rear crossmember onto the chassis, and we are virtually there with the back half of this truck now. The back half of the chassis is now almost completely rebuilt and fixed. There's a couple of areas and a couple of little jobs that I still need to do. So one of them is just cutting this bit of angle out. It's only put there when they make the crossmember to hold the two extensions apart. So that's got to come out. I need to just clean up the joint here and here with a wire brush so I can just put some of the corrolus paint on to protect it. Before I can paint the actual galvanised bit, I need to T-wash it, which is an acid etch, which will allow the paint to actually stick to the galvanising. But the weather is a bit changeable today, so I'm not going to do that today, or probably not in this video. I'll do that job later on when the weather's a bit more reliable. For now, it can just stay galvanised, it's protected. I've now swapped over to a flat disc, and I'm going to just tidy up where I cut that bit of angle out and just run over the actual joints. So as you've seen, when I fitted the crossmember, I put the tub on and I set everything up kind of using the tub as a datum, so that I knew that once this is in and fixed as it is now, that the tub will physically go on, fit between the mounting points, and the doors will fit between the holes between the bulkhead and the rear tub, because that's all obviously key to getting everything to line up again when I'm finished. What I realised once the tub was on, the body mounts didn't meet the underside of the tub. So the body mounts on the underside of the tub weren't touching on these pads. Now that's kind of understandable on the middle ones, because when I put these on, you may remember I used a piece of metal across from this one to the one on the old crossmember that I've now got rid of, and that was low. So that makes sense, because this one would have been done on a plane like that, and this one has ended up in low. That's fine. But when I've got the rear tub on and it's bolted down to the tubs that I made up at the front, doors are all fine, lines up at the back, holes in the rear crossmember tabs line up with the bottom of the tub where they were before, so everything fits lovely, it's all great. But this body mount is low and this body mount is low. So what I'm going to do, or rather what I have done, is I got underneath when the tub was on, and I measured the gap between the top face of the body mount and the underside of where the tub actually sits on this, and I've noted on the side of the chassis what the difference is. So the middle ones on both sides needed to come up by 8mm, and these rear ones on both sides needed to come up approximately 10mm. So that obviously tells me that the line is slightly out somewhere. Not a big deal, it just means I'm going to have to cut these body mounts off and these ones again. These ones will be easier because I fully seam welded these ones when I put them back. So there's a bit more work on these, but nah, never mind. Upshot of the story is, if you're ever doing something like this and you take the body mountings off, my advice would be to leave them off until you've trial fitted the tub, and then you'd have the opportunity, then you could have the tub in place, get underneath with these loose, hold them up against where they should be and just tack weld them to hold them in position, then take the tub off and weld it properly. I haven't got that option. The tub's not handy at the minute, but what I found when I put my piece of steel back and clamp it so that it is square to this body mount, which has never been off, that is an original one in the original position, and the body actually sits on that as well. There is, you can see, a gap here between the bar and the piece of steel, and measuring it, this one, which I said needed to come up by 8mm, measures 8mm, and this one, which isn't square to this, that one is square to this line, this one isn't, but this measures between 12 and about 9mm. So in the middle there, which is probably where I measured it, it's about a 10mm gap. So I think what I'm going to do is cut these off. I'm going to cut both of these off and then clamp this bar back and simply attach them, pull them up to where this bar is, because that is a nice straight line, and I believe that because it matches the dimensions that I measured physically under the tub, I'm happy that's not going to lift the tub too far or anything, because the dimensions match. And it also makes sense that these should all be in that line. So that's what I'm working with, that's what I'm going with. It might be right, it might be wrong, it may not be the way that you'd do it, it's the way I'm going to do it. Yeah, you have to work with what you've got and the situation that you're in, I suppose. And this is the situation I'm in. Right, so that's the body mounts adjusted and welded back on in their new higher positions. Done that on both sides. So the next job that I need to do on the back half of this chassis before we're all sorted with it is, you may remember in one of the earlier videos I cut off an exhaust mount up here, and now I need to make a new one to put back. So to make a new one, what I've done is I went and found an existing one on a chassis, an original one, which had never been cut off or tampered with, and I've taken all of these measurements. So essentially that's the chassis rail across there, that's a body mount, and then this is the actual exhaust mount sticking out, and then this is it looking at it from the side. So then you've got the cross member rail, and I've got the dimensions of how far down it goes, and it's simply a piece of bent metal with a couple of holes in this section for the exhaust mount to bolt to. And you can see I've measured it, slightly overlaps onto the top of the chassis, just like the bits that were left on mine were. Then it projects 65mm, drops down 35, and it's got a 68mm leg, comes down at a 13-degree angle where it meets the chassis again. So this is the piece of 193 by 50mm steel which I've cut, and I've drilled the two holes in what will be the face where the exhaust mount actually fixes to it, and hopefully you can see on the video there's two scribed lines, which is where this needs to be bent. Now this is too deep on either side for me to bend it in the vise, because there's not enough depth in the jaws to do that and then hammer it over. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just slit this with the cutting disc, not all the way through, but just on these two lines, enough so that I can actually bend it easily. Then I'll just buzz a weld along the 2 points once it's where I want it to be. In fact, I might even weld it on and then just buzz along there, and then just clean those welds off afterwards, because I just don't have a piece of kit to actually make that bend properly without having to hammer it in something which will just make a mess of the bit of steel. So if I put a slitting disc in my grinder, that's just scored a couple of lines, so it should now be easier for me to bend these, and it will bend right on the line. So you can see that's, I couldn't do that if I hadn't already just scored those lines. I'd never be able to bend that as accurately as that. So now I'll just go and use my just put this in the vise and make sure that I get the angles right, then I think this will be good. So there we go, that's it, bent up based on the measurements that I've taken from the original one that's on an old chassis. But I'm pretty pleased with that. That looks good. I've marked some lines on the chassis, which is where the new bracket is going to go, and again these are based on the dimensions that I measured off of the other chassis that I happen to have that has got one of these originals still on it. So I'm happy that that's where it goes. So these marks are just so that I can grind back the paint and clean this all off in the right place. So the distance I measured between the edge of this body mount on the other chassis and the edge of this bracket was 14mm. So based on that measurement, it wants to go just there. So that's a new bracket actually welded on, and now I'll just weld along these two fold lines just to strengthen those up. There's a slightly closer view of it, and then what happens, if you're not familiar, is that this is the exhaust hanger that goes on it, and that will just bolt up against this face, and the holes, the two holes in there, and then there's this little clamp plate which goes on the outside, and a couple of bolts in from behind, and that is what holds the exhaust up at the back. So that's considerably better than what was there when I started. Pretty pleased with that. I think that looks good. Another small job that needs doing is where I welded these plates on that hold the front of the body tub. Just need to add a little triangular stiffener in here, which is what they had from the factory. It just stops this from bending, I suppose. So I've made one up, which I shall put in here. And weld it in.
So that's about it for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please hit like, please hit subscribe. Don't forget the notifications bell so you don't miss any of the new videos when they come out. Apart from that, again, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!